At its peak, American Can operated hundreds of factories, held roughly 90% of the American can market, and employed 1,500 workers in Geneva, New York alone. The Geneva plant is a business incubator now, startups at desks where 1,000 people once made cans around the clock. The sound of a seaming machine running 3 shifts through packing season, the metallic pulse that whole towns set their clocks by, went quiet one plant at a time until there was nothing left to listen for. Then, the decisions began. A federal court broke the discount system that kept customers locked in. William May shut down or sold 105 factories. William Woodside bought an insurance company with the proceeds. Gerald Tsai sold the entire packaging business to Triangle Industries. The board changed the name to Primerica, or the word can disappeared from the letterhead. In Maywood, Illinois, the place where Edwin Norton built the automatic line that made mechanized can making possible, the original site was demolished. No plaque, no marker. The origin of an industry that touches every kitchen in America erased to bare ground. This is the story of a man with no formal engineering training who built the system that packaged American food for a century, and the 3 CEOs who, one rational decision at a time, took it apart until even the name was gone. We tell the stories behind the industries that built the modern world and then disappeared from it. If that's your thing, subscribe. More of these are coming. Now, let's get back to the story. During the Second World War, the American can plant in Geneva, New York ran around the clock. 1,500 workers, 3 shifts, cans for rations and supplies and everything a country at war needed sealed and shipped across an ocean. The building was large enough to hold all of them and loud enough that you learned to read lips on the floor. The parking lot filled in waves at shift change. First shift out, second shift in, headlights crossing in the dark during winter months. The diners on the roads leading to the plant knew the schedule by the rushes. The grocers knew it by the paychecks. The landlords knew it by the first of the month. 1,500 people drawing wages from the same gate, and the town arranged itself around that fact the way a small body arranges itself around a heartbeat. After the war, the workforce settled. 1,500 became 875 by the mid-1960s, smaller, but still the kind of place where a family name got passed through the hiring office. Fathers and sons on the same floor, mothers whose household budgets tracked the overtime schedule, young men coming out of high school who knew where they were going because the plant was where people went. By 1981, 242 workers remained. By the time closure was announced in 1989, there were 91. 91 people in a building built for 15 times that. A parking lot that could hold 1,000 cars with fewer than 100 in it. A break room where you could sit anywhere because there was no one to crowd you out. Whole sections dark, machines still bolted to the floor, no longer running, no longer maintained, gathering the kind of dust that settles on things nobody intends to start again. The plant in Geneva was not the only one. And it was not even the largest. But it was the one that held the full arc of what happened to American Can, compressed into a single building in a single town, readable in a single number, 1,500 to 91 in 45 years. Across the country, the same story played out at different speeds. In the 1970s, American Can shut down or sold about 105 factories, not in one sweep. One plant at a time, year after year, a map of industrial America being edited line by line. In San Francisco, a giant complex that had employed thousands closed in 1969. In Maywood, Illinois, the place where the whole enterprise really started, where the machinery and methods that built the company were first developed, the original site was eventually demolished. By the late 1990s, almost nothing was left of it. The nucleus of the empire flattened. And then the company did something worse than closing factories. In 1986, American Can sold its packaging businesses, the cans, the cartons, the plants, the customers, the service network, the research, to Triangle Industries. The following year, the company changed its name to Primerica, a financial services firm. No cans, no factories, no machines. The word can gone from the letterhead, the lobby, the annual report. The company that had packaged America could not preserve itself. This is not a story about containers, though containers are in every scene. It is a story about a company that helped build the infrastructure of modern American life. The sealed can, the supermarket shelf, the idea that food could travel 1,000 miles and arrive safe. And then, decision by decision, survived by becoming less and less itself. Until the name meant nothing. Until even the people who had worked there had to explain what the company used to be. It starts with a man who could not stop improving a machine. And almost nothing survives of that man beyond the machines themselves. Edwin Norton had little formal schooling, no engineering degree, no university training in metallurgy or mechanics. What he had was a mechanical obsession so total that it left almost no room for anything else in the historical record. We know what he built. We know how his methods changed an industry. We know that his operation in Maywood, Illinois, became the technological center of American can making. What we do not know, what apparently no one thought to preserve, is what he looked like at the end of a workday, whether he had children who visited the shop, what his voice sounded like when he found a flaw in a seam and stopped a line to fix it. He is a man who survives as a method. The person disappeared into the process so completely that the process is all that remains. And there is something fitting about that, because the process was everything to him. Norton came up through tinplate work in the years after the Civil War, when cans were still made largely by hand. A skilled tinsmith could turn out maybe 5 or 6 cans a minute, cutting, forming, soldering, sealing. Every seam was a judgment call, every lid set by feel. The pace was limited by the speed of human hands, and the quality was limited by attention on a given afternoon. Norton hated that. Not the workers, the inconsistency, the wasted motion, the variation. The fact that the same step done by the same person would come out slightly different every time. He started designing machines to replace individual steps, then connecting those machines into sequences, then connecting the sequences into something nobody had built before. By 1883, Norton and his operation had developed what became known as the automatic line. Raw tin plate went in one end, finished cans came out the other. Workers still fed the machines, monitored the seams, cleared the jams, but the rhythm of production had shifted from the body to the equipment. A line could produce cans at a rate and consistency no team of hand solderers could match. His base was Maywood, just outside Chicago. Norton Brothers became the technological heart of American can making. The machines he built and the methods his shop developed spread outward through licensing, imitation, and eventually acquisition. He held patents across many parts of the process, not one breakthrough, but a web of improvements, each one tightening the system, each one making the previous step faster or more reliable. The man's flaw was his gift. He could not leave the process alone. Every time the line ran, he saw something that could be better. A fraction of a second saved on a seam, a cleaner cut on the blank, a feed mechanism that jammed less often. This is the kind of person who builds an industry without noticing he has done it, because he is always looking at the next imperfection. What Norton could not see, what no inventor in his position ever sees, is that the system he built was too good to stay in his hands. The automatic line did not just make better cans, it made consolidation possible. When production depends on a craftsman's hands, you cannot easily merge 100 workshops because the value walks out the door every evening. When production depends on machines and methods that can be installed in any plant, the value is in the system, and systems can be bought. By the late 1890s, the American can industry was a collection of roughly 175 small and mid-sized manufacturers. Most used some version of the machinery Norton's operation had pioneered. They competed on price, geography, relationships with local packers. It was fragmented, regional, and, to the men who thought in terms of consolidation, inefficient. The men who saw that opportunity were not inventors, they were financiers. The Moore brothers, William and James, assembled companies the way other men assembled machines. Their method was consolidation. Identify a fragmented industry, buy enough of the players to control pricing, fold them into a single corporation, and sell stock on the promise of monopoly efficiency. They had done it with matches. They had done it with crackers and cookies, forming what became the National Biscuit Company. By 1901, they were looking at tin cans. American Can Company was incorporated that year. The consolidation moved fast. One strong source says 123 factories were folded into the new company. A later academic history puts it at more than 100 of the roughly 175 manufacturers then operating. Either way, in a single corporate action, a fragmented national industry became one company's network. Norton's operation sat at the technological center. The Moore brothers provided the financial architecture. Norton provided the industrial spine. Without his automatic line and the web of improvements built around it, there was nothing to consolidate. You cannot merge 123 tin can shops into a functioning monopoly if they run on craft skill and local knowledge. You can merge them if they run on transferable machinery. Norton had built the thing that made the combination work. The new company emerged with roughly 90% of the American can market, and then it did what rapid consolidations always do. It started closing the pieces it had just bought. Duplicate plants were shut, overlapping operations eliminated. The 123 factories did not stay 123 factories. The point of buying them was never to run them all. It was to own the capacity and then subtract the redundancy. Workers in plants that had operated independently for decades showed up to find the new owners had different plans for their building. The antitrust trouble came almost immediately. By 1913, American Can's share had fallen to about 50%, still dominant, still the largest player, but no longer the near monopoly it had started as. Some of that decline was forced by legal pressure. Some was the market reasserting itself. Competitors who had not been acquired grew, new entrants appeared, and food packers began to realize that depending on one supplier for their most essential input was a vulnerability. But even at 50%, American Can was something no other company could match. It had the plants, the patents, the research capacity, and the service network. This is the part of the story that numbers alone cannot tell. Martin Corcoran worked in the industry during the years when American Can and its chief rival Continental dominated the business. His testimony survives in academic records, and what he described was not a company that won on price. It was a company that won on presence. The can business was seasonal. When packing season hit, when the peaches came in, when the tomatoes were ready, when the corn had to be processed before it turned, the food packer needed containers immediately. Not next week. Now. American Can had built a system to deliver exactly that. Containers ready when the season hit. Service people reachable at any hour. Technical help that showed up in minutes or hours. If a canner's line went down at the peak of harvest, American Can had someone there. Corcoran described a relationship so deep it became dependency. The company did not just sell cans, it sold the assurance that the cans would be there, right size, right quantity, at the exact moment the food was ready to pack. For a small processor running on thin margins with a harvest window measured in days, that assurance was worth more than any discount. Howard Cumming, another industry witness, put it more directly. Many canners, he said, could not have lived without American Can and Continental. Those two companies provided research, technical support, and logistical reliability that smaller food processors could not build for themselves. In Geneva, this translated into something the town could feel. When the packing season hit, the plant's rhythm accelerated. More shifts, more overtime, more trucks pulling out of the loading dock. Workers who had been running one line found themselves covering two. The seasonal surge was not just a business cycle, it was the town's pulse quickening. Grocers stocked up because they knew the overtime checks were coming. Families made summer plans around the schedule. The plant's calendar was Geneva's calendar, and both of them were set by the ripening of crops hundreds of miles away. This is what American Can was at its best. Not a manufacturer in the narrow sense, but infrastructure. Not visible the way a railroad is visible, visible the way packaging is visible, not at all until it fails. Every sealed can on every grocery shelf was a small act of trust. Trust that the food inside was safe, that the seal would hold, that the container met a standard someone was responsible for maintaining. American Can was, for millions of Americans who never knew its name, the company maintaining that trust. The factory sound in those years was constant. The clatter of tin plate fed into cutting machines, the rhythmic punch of body makers forming cylinders, the hiss of soldering equipment sealing side seams, the rattle of finished cans moving down conveyor lines. In a working can plant, the sound never stopped during a shift. Industrial percussion, fast and repetitive and metallic. Workers did not describe their jobs in terms of the product, they described them in terms of the rhythm. You learned the rhythm of your machine, the rhythm of your line, the rhythm of the season. Your body knew what month it was by how fast the line ran. In Geneva, that rhythm had been running since before most of the town's residents were born. It was as constant as weather and as easy to take for granted. The lines ran. The trucks left full. The season always came. Nobody thought about what it would sound like if it stopped, because nobody had any reason to think it would. But American Can was not content to be the company that sealed America's food. It wanted to solve a problem everyone else had called impossible. It wanted to put beer in a can. The problem with putting beer in a can was not the can, it was the beer. Carbonation created internal pressure that a standard food can could not handle. The carbon dioxide wanted out, and if the can was not strong enough or the seal not tight enough, it would find a way. Beyond pressure, there was taste. Beer is sensitive to contact with metal. The wrong lining, or no lining at all, gave the beer a metallic flavor that made it undrinkable. And oxygen was an enemy. Even trace amounts getting through the container walls or seal would degrade the beer, turning it flat and stale before it reached the customer. Every brewer in America knew this. Every can maker knew it too. The consensus was that it could not be done, that beer was a glass product and would stay a glass product, that the chemistry and the physics were simply against the can. The bottle had worked for centuries. Leave it alone. American Can's engineers did not leave it alone. They spent years on it. They developed a special interior coating, a lining applied to the inside of the can that kept the beer from ever touching bare metal. They redesigned the can body to handle the carbonation pressure. They solved the sealing problem so that carbonation stayed in and oxygen stayed out. It was not one invention, it was a dozen smaller ones layered on top of each other, each one fixing a problem the previous fix had revealed. The kind of engineering that looks inevitable after the fact and looked impossible before it. The test market came in January 1935 near Richmond, Virginia. Kruger's finest beer and Kruger's cream ale. In cans, on shelves, sold to the public. Picture the moment, a store shelf in Virginia, January 1935. Among the bottles, brown glass, familiar, heavy, something new. A metal cylinder with a label wrapped around it, sitting where no metal cylinder had ever sat before. The customer who picked it up felt something different in the hand immediately. Lighter than a bottle, colder, faster, no deposit to worry about, and inside, when opened, beer that tasted like beer, not like tin, not like metal, not like the inside of a container, just beer. The cans did not explode, the seals held, the lining worked. Within the company, the beer can became one of American Can's proudest achievements, not because it was the most profitable product, but because it had taken imagination, hard work, time, and dollars to solve a problem everyone else had abandoned. By the end of 1935, dozens of breweries had followed Kruger into cans. The beer can did not replace the bottle overnight, but it cracked open a market that had not existed before. Beer could now go places bottles could not, to picnics, to beaches, to ball games, anywhere you did not want to carry glass and did not want to pay a deposit. Think about a July afternoon at a baseball stadium, the sun on the upper deck, the crowd noise, and in your hand, a cold can of beer that you bought for $0.25 and would crush when you finished it and drop under your seat. That experience did not exist before January 1935. American Can made it possible. The can made beer portable in a way that matched how Americans actually lived, and Americans responded by buying it in quantities that surprised even the brewers. The beer can became as much a part of summer as the games it was drunk at. It became a fixture at backyard cookouts, fishing trips, beach coolers, tailgates. It became so ordinary, so default, so standard, that within a generation, no one remembered that there had been a time when it did not exist. And then something else happened. Something that would connect American Can's product to the most famous image in American art. In 1962, Andy Warhol exhibited his Campbell's soup cans, 32 canvases, each one depicting a different variety of Campbell's condensed soup, painted with the flat precision of a commercial illustration. The cans in those paintings were real products that sat on real shelves in real grocery stores across America. And the containers that held Campbell's soup, the physical metal cans that Warhol immortalized, were made by companies like American Can. Warhol's paintings turned the humble can into an icon. The can as art object, the can as statement about mass production, consumerism, American abundance, the can as the thing so ordinary it became extraordinary when someone bothered to look at it. What Warhol understood, what made the paintings revolutionary, was that the can was already the most recognizable object in American domestic life. He did not elevate it, he pointed at it. American Can had spent 60 years making the can invisible, so reliable, so standard, so ubiquitous that no one noticed it. Warhol made it visible again, and in doing so accidentally created the most lasting monument to the work of companies like American Can. Not a plaque, not a museum exhibit, a painting of a soup can that everyone in the world recognizes. The company itself got no credit for this. American Can is not mentioned in art history. Norton's name does not appear in any analysis of Warhol. The container is the subject. The maker of the container is invisible, which is, in a way, about the perfect summary of what American Can had always been, the company behind the thing behind the product, 3 layers removed from the consumer's attention, essential and anonymous. But the beer can and the soup can and the milk carton and the aerosol spray and every other container American Can produced were all part of the same story. The can as platform. If you could solve the engineering, you could put almost anything inside it: motor oil, paint, juice, vegetables, pet food, chemicals. The sealed metal container was not a fixed product. It was a delivery system for modern consumer life. By the mid-20th century, American Can was at its peak. Hundreds of plants, tens of thousands of workers, a service network reaching every corner of the food industry, research labs solving problems canners did not know they had yet. In Geneva, the plant hummed with the confidence of a place that had always been needed and expected to always be needed. The lines ran, the trucks left, the seasonal rhythm held. The can was everywhere, and because it was everywhere, no one, inside the company or outside it, spent much time thinking about what would happen if the world decided it could get its cans from someone else. 3 forces were moving against American Can by mid-century. Each one was slow, each one was quiet, and each one made the others worse. The first was legal. In 1950, a federal court struck down the volume discount system that American Can and Continental had used for decades to lock in their biggest customers. The more cans you bought, the cheaper each can got, a structure that made switching suppliers irrational for any large food packer. The ruling broke that lock. Without the discount ladder, big customers had less reason to stay, and some of them started asking the question American Can had spent decades making sure they never needed to ask: could we just make our own cans? For the biggest food companies, the answer was yes. Building your own can line required capital and expertise, but at sufficient volume, the math worked. Each customer that moved to self-manufacture was not a competitor taking market share. It was something worse, a customer deciding it no longer needed the relationship at all. The second force was material. The American Can had always been steel. Tin plate, specifically, a thin sheet of steel coated with tin to prevent corrosion. Norton's machines were designed for it. Every plant in the network was built around it. Then aluminum arrived, and it was better in almost every way that mattered. Lighter, easier to form, no rust. It could be drawn into the 2-piece can, body and bottom from a single piece of metal, no side seam at all. Cheaper at scale, lighter to ship, easier to recycle. The problem was not that aluminum existed. The problem was that switching to it meant rebuilding the entire manufacturing base from the ground up. New plants, new machines, new processes, new skills. And plastics opened yet another front. Every product that moved from metal to a plastic container was a product that no longer needed American cans factories at all. The third force was the quietest. American Can had built its empire on being indispensable. Containers ready when the season hit, engineers on call, research and support that smaller canners could not provide for themselves. But the industry was maturing. Food companies were getting larger, more capable. The canner who once needed American Can's engineer now had engineers of his own. The dependency that had been the foundation of the whole relationship was fading, not because American Can had failed, but because it had succeeded. It had helped build an industry competent enough to no longer need a parent. William Woodside, who would later lead the company through its most dramatic transformation, described the shift in a single image. When he started in the business in 1950, he said, "Cans were the prima donna of the opera. By the early 1980s, they were the last row of the chorus, still present, still performing, but no longer the thing anyone was watching." The can had become a commodity. And a company built on being indispensable cannot survive as a commodity supplier. The margins are too thin, the loyalty too shallow, the switching costs too low. In Geneva, the erosion did not announce itself. It arrived as a gradual thinning. Lines that had run 2 and 3 shifts dropped to 1. Seasonal hiring shrank. Positions that opened when someone retired were not filled. The break room got quieter. The parking lot had more empty spaces. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, just a slow retreat of activity from the edges of the building inward, like water pulling back from a shoreline. The workers who paid attention could read it. They could count the cars. They could see the sections going dark. But the plant was still open, the paychecks still cleared, and the seasonal rhythm still held, diminished but present. As long as the line ran, you could tell yourself the worst was not coming. American Can's share of the beverage can market, the fastest growing segment, the future of the industry, dropped from 28% in 1971 to about 18% by the early 1980s. 10 points gone. Not to one competitor, but to the entire restructuring of an industry that no longer needed what American Can was built to provide. The question was no longer whether the company would change. The question was what would be left when the changing was done. The man who started the dismantling was not a villain. William May became CEO of American Can in the early 1970s, and what he saw when he looked at the company was not an empire to be celebrated. It was a network of aging factories built for a product the market was leaving behind. Buildings 30, 40, 50 years old, in the wrong places for the new geography of food production, using the wrong equipment for the new materials. Employing workers trained in techniques the two-piece aluminum can had made obsolete. Keeping them open was not preserving the company. It was subsidizing the past, so May began closing them. About 105 factories producing roughly $1.2 billion in annual sales were shut down or sold over the course of the decade. That sentence moves fast on the page. It moves slowly in the towns where it happened. A plant closure at American Can followed a pattern that workers across the network came to recognize. First, the orders thinned. Lines that had run multiple shifts dropped to 1. Maintenance requests were delayed, then denied. Equipment that broke was not replaced. The building did not go dark all at once. It dimmed. Then came the announcement, sometimes through management, sometimes through rumor first. The plant would close. Workers with seniority might be offered transfers. Workers without it were offered severance or nothing. What May built to replace the old network was leaner and technologically current. 62 plants in place of the sprawl. 8 new two-piece can factories designed for aluminum, built from the ground up at a cost of about $200 million. Faster, more efficient, capable of producing the cans the beverage industry now demanded. On paper, the math worked. But May was not the only one making this transition. Continental was modernizing too. New competitors had entered, companies that had never carried the weight of aging factories, companies that had started with aluminum, to companies that did not need to demolish their past before building their future. American Can was spending $200 million to reach a position where others already stood. May's closures were painful but honest. He was trying to keep American Can in the can business by making the can business viable. The 105 shutdowns were brutal, but they were in service of continuation. He was not abandoning the identity. He was trying to afford it. In Geneva, May's decade registered as acceleration of the thinning that had already begun. The plant was not among the first wave of closures. It was a machinery operation as well as a can works, which gave it a complexity that pure can plants lacked. But the trajectory was visible. Every closure elsewhere in the network was a signal about where things were heading. Workers in Geneva read the trade press, and heard from friends at other plants tracked the pattern. They knew the arithmetic. They just did not yet know their own number. What came after May was different in kind, not just degree. The man who succeeded him in shaping the company's direction was William Woodside, and Woodside had decided that the can business was no longer worth saving, only worth spending. Woodside called his strategy asset redeployment. The term was clean and corporate. What it meant was selling pieces of the old American can and using the proceeds to buy into entirely different industries. If the can business was a declining margin commodity, then every dollar locked in can making was a dollar earning less than it could earn elsewhere. Woodside did not want to manage a slow decline. He wanted to build a door out of it. In 1981, American Can acquired Associated Madison Companies, a financial services firm, insurance, investments, the kind of business where capital worked differently than in a factory. No raw materials, no machines to maintain, no seasonal rhythms, no union contracts. A business measured in portfolios and premiums rather than tons of tin plate and cans per minute. It was the first step through a door the company would never come back through. Gerald Tsai accelerated the passage. Tsai was a financier, not a packaging man, not a manufacturing man, not someone who had come up through plants or service networks. He had made his reputation in mutual funds and investment management. He looked at American Can and saw what Woodside had seen, only with less sentiment, a collection of assets, some earning acceptable returns, most not, but all carrying a name that described a business the company no longer wanted. Between 1982 and 1986, the acquisitions came fast. Financial services, insurance, specialty retail. Each one moved the company further from containers. The can business went from being the core of the enterprise to the part that no longer fit. Woodside and Tsai were not the same man, but they were the same movement. Woodside opened the door. Tsai walked through it and locked it behind him. Together they completed what May had started, not the modernization of American Can, but its replacement. May had tried to save the can business by rebuilding it. Woodside and Tsai saved the company by abandoning the can business entirely. The sequence had its own momentum. Each step made the next easier to justify. Once you have closed half your plants, the remaining half bear heavier overhead, which makes their economics look worse, which makes the next closure easier to approve. Once you have acquired an insurance company, the comparison between its margins and the packaging margins makes packaging look like dead weight. Once you have decided to become something else, every piece of what you used to be looks like something to sell. Woodside himself admitted that at least one major sale was mistimed. The Dixie cup and plate business, sold during the divestiture spree. His own words, "If ever there was a bad time to sell those assets, we picked it." The admission matters not because it shows incompetence, but because it shows the momentum overriding judgment. The direction had become more powerful than any individual decision within it. By the mid-1980s, American Can was a company at war with its own name. In 1986, American Can sold its U.S. packaging operations to Triangle Industries. The cans, the cartons, the plants, the equipment, the customer relationships, the service contracts, the technical knowledge, everything that had made American Can what its name said it was. Sold outright to another company that wanted to be in the packaging business. Triangle wanted the factories. Triangle wanted the customers. Triangle wanted the machines and the contracts and the infrastructure that American Can had spent 85 years building. What American Can got was cash and the freedom to become something else. The following year, 1987, the company changed its name. American Can Company became Primerixa Corporation. The new name was deliberately empty of industrial meaning. It could have been an insurance company, a bank holding company, a consulting firm. That was the point. Primerica was not supposed to remind anyone of tin plate or factories or the sound of a line running at 3 in the morning during packing season. For workers in the plants that Triangle now operated, and for workers in the plants that had already been closed, the name change was a second loss. The first loss was the job, or the fear of it, or the knowledge that the plant down the road had already gone dark. The second loss was the identity. You could not say you worked for American Can and point to a company that still existed under that name. The name was gone. The company that remained did not want it. This is what separates American Can from a standard industrial decline. Plenty of companies shrink, plenty lose market share, or close plants, lay off workers. American Can did not simply get smaller. It did not simply fail. It systematically sold the thing it was, the physical business, the manufacturing capability, the identity, and replaced it with something that had no connection to the original enterprise, except the capital one had generated for the other. The can business funded the transformation. Norton's machines, Corcoran's service network, the research labs that cracked the beer can, and the milk carton and the aerosol container. All of it, in the end, was converted into capital. That capital bought insurance companies and investment firms that had nothing to do with sealing food in metal. By every metric a financial analyst would use, the transformation could be called successful. The assets redeployed from low-margin declining business into higher-margin growing business, value preserved, strategy executed. The stock did fine. The shareholders were not wiped out. The executives collected their compensation. But value and meaning are not the same thing. The value of American Can's packaging business could be calculated: revenue, margins, assets, customer contracts. What could not be calculated was what the business had meant to the towns that had organized their economies around the plants, to the workers who had built identities around the work, to the customers who had depended on that service network through 50 packing seasons, to the idea, never stated on a balance sheet, that American Can was a company that made things, physical things you could hold, fill, seal, stack, ship, and open at a kitchen table. So Primerica did not make things. Primerica managed money. In Geneva, the sale to Triangle and the rename to Primerica were received the way a change of government is received in a small country far from the capital, with confusion, then resignation, then the realization that the new name on the paperwork did not change the reality on the floor. The plant was still open, the machines still ran. The work was the same work. But the workers were now employees of a company they had never heard of, doing work that the company they had heard of had decided was no longer worth doing. The American Can sign came down. Whatever replaced it, Triangle's name or nothing, marked the moment when the plant in Geneva became an orphan, still functioning, still producing, but belonging to no one who had built it and no one who understood what it had been. Now almost nothing survives of what the workers in Geneva felt during these years. No oral history project recorded their voices. No journalist sat down with the men and women on the floor and asked what it was like to watch a company sell itself out from under you. The union records, if they exist, have not been collected into any accessible archive. The local newspaper covered the closures and the layoffs, but newspapers report events, not the slow interior experience of watching your workplace become a stranger's property. This absence is itself part of the story. American Can was so thoroughly erased, not just the factories, not just the name, but the institutional memory, that even the testimony of its workers is largely gone. The people who ran the lines, who knew the sound of a seaming machine slightly out of alignment, who could feel the difference between good tin plate and damp tin plate under their fingers, those people had knowledge that existed nowhere except in their hands and ears and habits. When they left, the knowledge left with them. No one recorded it, no one asked. The competition, companies like Continental, companies that survived longer or merged differently, left thicker documentary trails. American Can's trail is thin. The company that packaged a country left remarkably little packaging around its own history. What remains is the building in Geneva, the cleared ground in Maywood, the paperwork in archives, and the cans themselves, billions of them in landfills and recycling plants and kitchen cabinets, carrying no trace of the company that made their existence possible. The Geneva plant did not close all at once. It closed the way American Can itself closed, in stages, each one smaller than the last, each one taking something that could not be put back. After the sale to Triangle, the plant kept running. Different name on the paperwork, same work on the floor. The machines did not care who owned them. The seaming heads still turned. The conveyors still carried finished cans toward the loading dock. The seasonal rhythm still held, though the seasons were shorter now and the surges less dramatic. A worker who had been there 20 years could do the same job under a new owner and tell himself that nothing fundamental had changed. But the numbers kept falling. The 242 workers who had been there in 1981 became fewer. Each year, a few more positions disappeared, retirements that were not replaced, transfers to other facilities, layoffs that were small enough to be absorbed without headlines, but steady enough to be felt. The building itself became a record of subtraction, sections that had once been active now roped off or locked, machines that had not run in months standing in rows like equipment in a museum no one visits. The workers who remained developed the particular vigilance of people who know they are being counted. They watched for the signs. A visit from corporate that was not on the regular schedule, a maintenance request approved after months of being ignored, which could mean investment or could mean someone was preparing the building for sale, a supervisor who avoided eye contact after a phone call. In a shrinking plant, every anomaly is a signal, and every signal is read as confirmation of the thing you already fear. By 1989, 91 workers were left. And then the announcement came. The plant would close. The remaining operations would be consolidated elsewhere. The building that had held 1,500 people during the war, that had been the center of Geneva's industrial life for decades, that had survived every previous round of cuts, would shut down. 91 people received that news. 91 people who had watched the workforce shrink around them for years, who had outlasted every previous round, who had perhaps allowed themselves to believe that surviving this long meant they would survive entirely. The announcement ended that belief. What happens to a town when its largest employer closes is well documented in the aggregate. Tax base shrinks, property values fall, young people leave, services are cut. What is less documented is the specific texture of the loss, not the economics, but the feeling. The last shift, the walk to the parking lot knowing you will not walk back, the drive home past the diner that will close in 6 months because there are not enough lunch customers anymore, the conversation with your spouse that evening, the realization that the thing you had organized your working life around, the schedule, the commute, the paycheck, the identity of being someone who made something in a specific building, is finished. In Geneva, that texture is largely unrecorded. The workers who lived through the closure did not, so far as the available record shows, sit for interviews about what it felt like. No documentary crew filmed the last day. No oral historian collected the stories of the men and women who had spent 5, 10, 20, 30 years inside that building and then walked out of it for the last time. This is the silence that sits at the center of American Can's story. A company that employed tens of thousands of people across hundreds of plants over the better part of a century, and almost no one thought to record what those people experienced. The executives left memoirs and interviews and annual reports. The industry left academic studies and market analyses. The workers left almost nothing. Or if they did, it has not been collected, not been digitized, not been made findable. The absence matters because the workers were the company, not the stock price, not the board strategy, not the corporate name. The company was the people who stood at the machines and made the cans and loaded the trucks and went home tired and came back the next morning. Without their testimony, The story of American Can is told entirely from above, from the executive suite, from the courtroom, from the analyst's desk. The view from the factory floor is missing. And the view from the factory floor is the only view that would tell you what was actually lost. What we can say about Geneva is limited to what the numbers in the building tell us. The numbers say 1,500 to 91 in 45 years. The numbers say that a place which once ran around the clock for a country at war ended with fewer workers than a mid-sized restaurant has staff. The building says something else. After closure, the Geneva plant was not demolished. It was repurposed, turned into an incubator, a space for smaller businesses and startups. The walls survived, the floor survived, the loading dock survived. What did not survive was the function. Where a single employer had once provided over 1,000 jobs with benefits and pensions and union contracts, a collection of small tenants now occupied the same square footage. The building was full again, in a sense, but the thing it had been, a place where a town's worth of people made a single product together, day after day, year after year, generation after generation, was gone. The conversion of the Geneva plant from factory to incubator is not a tragedy in the simple sense. The building found a new use. People work there. Economic activity continues. But there is a difference between a building that houses an employer and a building that houses tenants. An employer organizes a community around shared work. Tenants share a roof. The distinction is the distance between a town with a center and a town with real estate. What makes American Can's story hard to let go of is that the company did not lose to a competitor. It did not go bankrupt. It did not make one catastrophic bet that wiped it out. It made a series of rational decisions, each one defensible, each one removing another piece of the thing that gave the company its meaning. The 1950 court ruling was not American Can's fault. The shift from steel to aluminum was not American Can's fault. The maturation of the food industry, the rise of self-manufacture, the commoditization of the container, none of these were failures of imagination. The company's engineers were still solving problems. The research labs were still innovating. As late as 1984, American Can developed the squeezable plastic ketchup bottle for Heinz, a product that became ubiquitous, that changed how Americans interacted with a condiment they had been pounding out of glass bottles for decades. The Heinz bottle was a genuine innovation. It solved a problem every American knew: the weight, the shake, the pounding of the glass bottom, the sudden flood of ketchup when it finally came loose. The squeezable bottle made all of that disappear. You picked it up, you squeezed, ketchup came out. Simple, elegant, the kind of design that once you have used it, you cannot imagine going back. But the Heinz bottle was plastic, not metal, not a can. American Can's most visible late innovation was a product that had nothing to do with the business that gave the company its name. The company could still invent. It could still see what consumers wanted before they knew they wanted it. It just could not do those things within the identity it had carried for 80 years. This is the cruelty at the center of the story. American Can did not stop being good. It stopped being good at the thing it was supposed to be. The skills transferred, the identity did not. Every successful innovation in plastics or paperboard or flexible packaging was simultaneously proof that the company could adapt and proof that the adaptation was carrying it further from itself. When May closed 105 factories, he was trying to save the can business by modernizing it. When Woodside began redeploying assets, he was trying to save the company by moving beyond cans. When Sy sold the packaging operations, he was trying to save the shareholders by completing the transformation. Each man solved the problem he inherited from the one before. Each solution created the next problem. And the cumulative effect of 3 successive rescues was the complete erasure of the thing being rescued. The workers did not experience this as strategy. They experienced it as a series of losses with diminishing explanations. In the 1970s, when May was closing the old plants, the explanation was modernization. We are building new facilities. The technology has changed. Workers who lost their jobs could at least see new plants going up elsewhere. The company was still in the business. The loss was local. By the early 1980s, when Woodside began the acquisitions, the explanation shifted. Diversification, reducing dependence on a single industry. Workers still making cans could hear this and wonder where they fit in a company buying insurance firms, but the lines were still running and the paychecks still cleared. By the mid-1980s, when Sy sold the packaging business, there was no explanation that connected past to future. The workers in the remaining plants would become employees of Triangle Industries. The company they had known was changing its name. The explanation was directed at shareholders, not at people who ran machines. At no point did anyone stand in front of the workforce and say, "We have decided that making cans is not valuable enough to continue." That sentence was never spoken. The decisions said it. Every closed plant said it. Every insurance acquisition said it. Every quarterly report that devoted more pages to financial services than to packaging said it. The message was delivered not in words, but in allocation, in where the capital went, in what the executives talked about, in what the name would become. The workers heard it without it ever being said. There is a version of this story that makes the executives into villains. May the closer, Woodside the pivoter, Sy the liquidator. Three men who took a company that had packaged America and turned it into a balance sheet exercise. But a CEO who had kept those 105 aging plants open would not have been a hero. He would have been the man who bankrupted the company earlier, and the workers would have lost their jobs anyway, all at once instead of in stages, with a dead company behind them instead of a functioning one. Woodside saw a commodity trap and built a door out of it. Sy completed a transformation that was already in motion, because half measures in corporate strategy are more destructive than decisive ones. Each man could defend his decisions. Each man did. The reasoning held. The analysis supported the conclusions. The problem was not any single decision. The problem was the sequence. 105 closures is not a series of individual choices. It is a direction. Acquiring insurance while closing plants is not diversification. It is replacement. Selling the entire packaging business and erasing the name is not strategy. It is surrender dressed in the language of strategy. No single link in the chain was wrong on its own. But the chain led from Norton's workshop to Primerica's boardroom, went from the sound of tin plate being cut to the silence of a conference room where no one has ever touched a can. The deepest cost was not economic. It was the loss of knowledge that existed nowhere except in the people who held it. A worker who had spent 20 years on a can line knew things no manual could teach. The sound a seaming machine made when it was slightly out of alignment, not a malfunction, not a breakdown, just a fraction of a degree off, producing a seam that would pass inspection but was not as strong as it should be. The feel of tin plate that had been stored in a damp warehouse, slightly different under the fingers, slightly more resistant to the tooling, requiring an adjustment so small it could not be written on a blueprint, but had to be felt. The rhythm of a line running well versus a line running adequately, a difference only perceptible to someone who had listened to that line for years, the way a musician hears a note that is technically in tune but emotionally wrong. This knowledge was not transferred when the plants closed. It was not captured in exit interviews or stored in databases. It left when the workers left, in their hands, in their ears, in the accumulated physical intelligence of decades spent doing one thing with enough attention to master it. When the last experienced worker walked out of a closing plant, a particular kind of expertise walked out with them. The machines could be sold, the building could be demolished, but the knowledge was gone the moment the person carrying it drove home for the last time. Multiply that by 105 plants and thousands of workers and decades of accumulated skill, and you begin to understand what disappeared. Not just jobs, not just buildings, not just a name, a body of physical knowledge built over 100 years of making one product as well as it could be made. The can itself survived. Cans are still everywhere. Aluminum cans holding beer and soda on every shelf, steel cans holding soup and vegetables and fruit. The container that Edwin Norton helped mechanize is still one of the most common objects in daily life. The product did not need the company. It had never needed the company. It needed the process, and the process had been copied, refined, and distributed so widely that no single company owned it anymore. This is perhaps the final measure of what Norton built. The system he created was so good. It is so transferable, so independent of any individual's skill that it outlived not only him, but the entire corporation constructed on top of his work. The automatic line did not die with American Can. It became the standard. It became the way cans are made everywhere, by everyone, without anyone thinking about where the method came from. In Maywood, Illinois, the origin of that method has been physically erased. Norton's operation occupied a specific piece of ground in Maywood. Buildings stood there. Workshops, machine shops, the spaces where the automatic line was developed and refined, where the engineering that equipped an industry was worked out by a man with no formal training and an inability to stop improving things. The Maywood Works were not just another plant in the network. They were the seed. The place where mechanized can-making became real. Those buildings are gone, demolished by the late 1990s. The site cleared. Not converted to offices, not repurposed as a warehouse, not preserved as a landmark. Cleared. The ground, where Norton built the machines that built the industry, is ground again, empty or occupied by something that has no connection to what was there before. No historical marker identifies the site. No plaque explains that this is where the automatic line was developed, where the methods that defined can-making for a century were invented, where a man who left almost no personal trace built a system that outlasted every institution that tried to own it. The ground carries no record of Norton. The demolition was not deliberate erasure. No one decided to destroy the memory. It was indifference. Old industrial buildings in old industrial suburbs cost money to maintain. When the industry leaves, the buildings become liabilities. They come down not out of malice, but out of accounting. And accounting is more thorough than malice because it never hesitates. If you could stand on that ground and know what had been there, if you could see the workshops as they were, hear the machines as they ran, watch Norton moving between stations with his eye on a seam that was not quite right, you would understand something about American industry that the stock charts and merger documents cannot convey. You would understand that the value of a place like Maywood was never in the real estate. It was in the accumulation of intelligence that happened inside the buildings. Decades of problems solved, methods tested, adjustments made. On all of it housed in a specific location, carried by specific people, and destroyed not by a decision to destroy it, but by the absence of a decision to save it. Norton would not have mourned the buildings. He was not that kind of man. He would have been somewhere else, improving something, tightening a tolerance, shaving a fraction of a second off a cycle. The buildings were never the point for him. The process was the point. But Norton is gone, and the process belongs to everyone now, and the buildings are gone, and the company is gone, and the name is gone. What remains is the can. You have one in your kitchen right now. Open the cabinet. It is there, behind the cereal, next to the pasta, on the shelf where you keep the things you do not think about until you need them. A can of soup, a can of tomatoes, a can of beans bought 3 weeks ago and pushed to the back. Pick it up, feel the weight of it, the cool of the metal through the label, the slight ridge where the lid meets the body, the seam running up the side, or on a newer can, no seam at all, just a smooth cylinder drawn from a single piece of aluminum, a shape that exists because engineers figured out how to convince metal to do something it resists. That can is the end of a chain that runs back over 100 years. The steel or aluminum was mined, smelted, rolled into sheets, cut into blanks, formed into cylinders, sealed, coated, labeled, filled, sealed again, packed, shipped, shelved, and picked up by your hand. Every step in that chain was engineered by someone. Many of those steps were first engineered in a workshop in Maywood, Illinois. By a man who had no formal training and could not stop improving things and whose name you have never heard. Edwin Norton did not design the can you are holding, but he designed the system that made it possible, the automatic line, the principle that raw material goes in one end and finished containers come out the other. The idea that the human hand guides the process, but does not limit it. Every can in every cabinet in every kitchen in America is a descendant of that idea. The idea survived. The man did not. The company did not. The factory did not. American Can is not a name anyone recognizes. Say it at a dinner party and you will get a blank look. Say it to someone under 40 and they will assume you are talking about a recycling program. The company that once held 90% of the can market, that operated hundreds of plants, that employed tens of thousands of workers, that solved the beer can problem and helped build the supermarket shelf and made the sealed container a default feature of American domestic life. That company exists now only in court records, academic studies, and the memories of people old enough to have worked there. Primerica, the company American Can became, was itself eventually absorbed into other corporate structures. The name Primerica still exists, attached to a financial services company that has no memory of tinplate or packing seasons or the sound of a seaming machine at 3 a.m. The lineage is technically traceable, incorporation papers, merger documents, SEC filings, but the connection is genealogical, not real. No one at Primerica today could tell you who Edwin Norton was, after what happened in January 1935 near Richmond, Virginia, or why the volume discount ruling of 1950 mattered, or what Martin Corcoran meant when he described a service network so responsive that canners could get help day or night during the season when everything depended on the containers arriving on time. The can industry continued without American Can. Triangle Industries, which bought the packaging operations, was itself acquired. The plants that survived kept running under different names. Cans kept being made. The product never needed the company. It needed the process, and the process had spread so far beyond any single owner that ownership became irrelevant. In Geneva, the building still stands. Office tenants where factory workers used to be. Computer hum where machine clatter used to be. The loading docks are the same loading docks. The walls are the same walls. But if you stood inside that building now, nothing you heard would tell you what the building was for. Nothing would tell you that 1,500 people once worked here around the clock, that the parking lot filled in waves at shift change, that the town's diners and grocers set their calendars by the plant's schedule, that families passed the hiring office like an inheritance. The building remembers nothing. Buildings never do. People remember, and the people are gone, retired, moved, passed away, scattered into the kind of dispersal that follows the closure of the thing that held a community in one place. In Maywood, there's not even a building to forget, just ground. The place where it all started, where Norton's machines first ran, where the automatic line proved that cans could be made at a speed and consistency that no human hand could match. That place is a cleared lot. No marker, no plaque, no museum, the origin of an industry that touches every household in America, unmarked and unremembered. You are still holding the can. It does its job so well that the job has disappeared from your attention. You do not think about who made it. You do not think about the system that produced it, the network that delivered it, the century of engineering that went into making it so reliable that reliability itself became invisible. You will open it tonight, use what is inside, and throw the can away without a thought for the company that taught America how to make it. That is American Can's legacy. Not a building, not a brand, not a name anyone remembers. Just the thing in your hand that works so well you have already forgotten it is there.